Rain clung to the windows of King County Superior Court, blurring Seattle into a gray watercolor as the judge's ruling dropped like a hammer. Brian Thorne didn't wait for the gavel. His grin arrived first. Across the aisle, Emily Sterling sat perfectly still, hands folded, posture steady in a way that made the silence feel heavier than the verdict itself. Brian leaned in just far enough for only she could hear. "You're finished, Emily." She lifted her eyes, calm, almost pitying. "Are you sure you understand what you just won, Brian?" Her lawyer stiffened. Even the clerk paused, sensing a tension that didn't match the easy victory on paper. But Brian waved it off, basking in the glow of his own triumph. When Emily rose, she didn't beg, argue, or break. She simply said, "I'll take my father's chess set. Nothing else." Brian scoffed. "Take the relic. It won't help you." Emily walked past him, whispering just loud enough, "You never learned how the board really works." And in that moment, brief, quiet, almost invisible to everyone but him, something inside Brian shifted. Because that line wasn't a farewell. It was the first move. And he had no idea the game had already begun. If this opening pulls you in, hit like and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for more gripping stories. The moment Emily stepped out of the courthouse, the cold Seattle air wrapped around her like a warning the city itself had been waiting to give. Her steps were measured, quiet, almost too controlled for someone who had just been stripped of nearly everything she once built a life around. But there was a steadiness in her breath, the kind that doesn't come from defeat, only from clarity. She moved down the marble steps, her simple purse tucked close to her side, unaware that a black sedan lingering near the curb tracked every one of her movements. Inside, Brian was still reveling. The courtroom door hadn't even cooled from closing before he began calling his colleagues, bragging about victory like it was a medal he'd earned rather than a woman he'd crushed. "She barely even fought," he said into his phone, adjusting his cufflinks as if preparing for a photo shoot. "I told you, man, kings don't bow." Sebastian, pacing beside him, half listening, half nervous, muttered, "Just remember, judges don't like being taunted. Tone it down." Brian only laughed. "Relax. I've already won." But in the hallway, a court clerk quietly gathered the paperwork Emily had left behind. At the top of one page, the clerk noticed a handwritten note folded near the request for her father's chess set. A strange little detail. Sentimental piece. Nothing of value, or so the clerk thought. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, Brian stood in the center of the Medina estate. No, Emily's former estate, transformed into a neon-lit monument to excess. Music thundered so loud the floorboards vibrated beneath polished shoes. Champagne overflowed from the bar as waves of influencers, tech investors, and shallow acquaintances filled the rooms, congratulating him for a victory they barely understood. He basked in it like a man starving for applause. From the balcony, he held a bottle of Cristal over his head and shouted, "To freedom!" The crowd cheered. Chloe curled into his side, whispering, "Everyone's watching you tonight." Brian smirked. Good. They should. But across the room, a few guests exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't the party. It was the atmosphere around Emily's absence, like a phantom lingering in the walls she once decorated with tenderness. Several guests remembered her kindness, her quiet way of making people feel seen. For a brief second, a hush fell, as if the house itself resented the celebration. Then the bass dropped again. The moment passed. Half an hour later, headlights cut through the driveway, and the vintage Rolls-Royce glided in without sound. When Marcus Sterling stepped out, the very man Brian claimed was irrelevant, conversations died mid-sentence. He wasn't fragile. He wasn't diminished. He walked with a slow, commanding certainty, each step echoing through the marble entryway. Inside the great hall, Brian leaned over the balcony railing. "Marcus, look who crawled out of retirement." Gasps rippled across the room. Marcus's gaze traveled upward, hard as winter stone. "I'm not here to crawl," Marcus said. "I'm here because a debt has come due." Brian rolled his eyes. "This again. You got what you wanted." Your daughter gets her dusty chess set. Don't embarrass yourself. Marcus stepped forward. You misunderstand me. I am not here to beg. I am here to reclaim what was stolen. The music stuttered, then cut entirely. The silence that followed felt biblical. Before Brian could respond, a security officer whispered into a guest's ear. Then another phone lit up. And another. A wave of alarm began spreading from screen to screen like a virus. One guest whispered, "Is this real?" Another said, "Check the news. Now." A tremor of unease crept through the crowd until finally someone shouted, "Brian! Your stock just got suspended." Laughs died instantly. Faces drained of color. Brian stormed down the stairs. "What the hell are you talking about?" A trembling voice answered, "Thorn Tech is offline. Everything. Counts. P servers. Even employee badges. It's all shut down." Brian reached for his phone, but alerts were already pouring in faster than he could swipe. SEC investigation initiated, account logins disabled, federal order. Assets frozen. His heart lurched for the first time that night. Marcus didn't move. He simply watched the unraveling with the cold patience of a man who knew this moment would come. "You're behind this," Brian hissed. "I merely opened the first door," Marcus replied. "You walked yourself into the rest." In darkness, the mansion's power cut entirely. Gus screamed. Glass shattered. Someone tripped over a table. The panic was immediate and absolute. And while Brian shouted for generators, for staff, for anyone to fix the chaos, Marcus turned and walked away. His cane tapping in a slow, deliberate rhythm that sliced through the darkness like a metronome counting down the end of Brian's empire. Outside, in the rain-soaked driveway, the tow truck hooked the McLaren with mechanical indifference. The repo driver said, "Nothing personal, man. Bank froze your accounts." Brian lunged forward. "That's my car." "Not anymore." One by one, the guests trickled out, whispers trailing behind them like funeral hymns. Chloe didn't stay long enough to pretend loyalty. She brushed past him, suitcase rolling behind her. "Your name's trending for all the wrong reasons," she said. "I can't be part of this disaster." By morning, Brian was a ghost moving through the city he once claimed to dominate. He pushed through the revolving doors of Thorn Tech, unshaven, trembling, demanding access. But the woman at the front desk recoiled slightly. "Mr. Thorn, you don't have clearance anymore." A familiar voice echoed from behind the security line. "That's because he doesn't work here." Emily stepped into view wearing a navy power suit that fit her like armor. Behind her, two board members flanked her like sentinels. Brian stared. "What are you doing here?" She answered plainly. "My job." She led him to the boardroom where everything unraveled for him piece by piece. Dr. Aries laid out the forensic code findings. Emily revealed the revoked license. The board confirmed the acquisition. Every detail struck Brian harder than the last. "You built nothing," Emily said quietly. "You stole everything, including years of my life." "No, Emily, please, you can't. You had the chance to share the crown," she said. "Instead, you threw away the queen." When security escorted him out, employees averted their eyes. Some out of pity, most out of relief. That night, after hours in FBI custody, after Sebastian's betrayal, after the interrogation shredded the last illusions Brian carried, he finally understood the real reason his empire imploded. Marcus hadn't destroyed him. His own arrogance did. 5 years later, the man sorting paperbacks in a prison library wasn't a king. He wasn't even a player on the board anymore. Just an echo wearing khaki, trapped between regret and the shell of a life he once wielded like a weapon. When the charity donation box arrived, Brian expected nothing more than dusty novels and outdated magazines. But the moment he opened the Forbes issue and saw Emily on the cover, smiling, radiant, successful, something in him fractured. She hadn't simply survived. She had soared. Later that night, in the dim light of his cell, he opened the mysterious package bearing the sterling return address. Inside lay the wooden king piece, broken, crownless. And Marcus's final letter. When Brian finished reading, his hands shook. Not from anger or fear, but from the revelation that he had spent his entire life chasing power the wrong way. A king without his queen. A man without values. A downfall he crafted with his own decisions. He understood now. But understanding did not save him. Across the prison corridor a guard shouted, "Lights out!" The heavy doors slammed shut. Brian stared at the broken king resting on the metal shelf. His only inheritance. And then came the final blow. A news alert from a guard's radio. Emily Sterling appointed to Federal Ethics Council, tasked with overseeing corporate fraud reform. The very system that imprisoned him now answered to her. His punishment was complete. His legacy erased. And the world would remember only the truth. Brian Thorne was the downfall of his own making. As the lights dimmed, a single question hung in the air like smoke. What happens when the king finally realizes he was never the one in power at all? In the quiet hours before dawn, Brian sat alone in the prison library, the broken king resting beside him. For once, he wasn't thinking about the company he lost or the world that no longer spoke his name. He was thinking about the moments he dismissed, the voices he ignored, the truth he spent years outrunning. Somewhere along the way, he had mistaken noise for strength and forgotten that real power never needed an audience. Across the table, the dim lamp flickered, casting the king's jagged crownless top in a soft amber glow. He traced the edge with his thumb, not as a man mourning what he used to be, but as someone finally understanding why he had fallen. His downfall wasn't a single mistake. It was 1,000 small choices made in the dark, choices he thought no one would ever see. Yet the truth had a way of surfacing, patient and relentless. He closed his eyes, breathing in the stillness, letting it settle into the spaces where pride once lived. Somewhere out there, Emily was building something whole, something honest. And for the first time, he wasn't angry about it. He was relieved, because the world she stepped into was the one he could never create. When the guards called for lights out, Brian didn't look up. He simply set the king upright, letting it stand on its own, even without its crown. It was a quiet reminder of what remains when the illusions fall away. If this story moved you, please like, share, and help Canada's Heartfelt Tales grow by subscribing to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.